بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي ونسلم على رسوله الكريم سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. www, three W's. The good question is, who wants war? For some, war is a mint, manufacturing dollars, printing dollars, unlimited, infinite. The question is, are we ready? You are the pawn in a big game. Some of us don't even know we're in the game. So the battle starts when you know yourself and you know who your enemy is. At the moment, we're literally oblivious. What are the ultimate consequences? And what happens is, man's best is used for man's worst. That's the khulasa, the summary of war. Everything is part of the big picture. Have we got the big picture? Have we understood? So amongst the mints of the world is the military expenditures, which is a big business. So number one, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, world military spending around 2021 has reached the all-time high of $2.1 trillion. Likewise, another great industry, and inshallah if we get time we'll go into that, the pharmaceutical industry. So global pharmaceutical market 2020 was around $1.2 trillion. In another report, just the US pharmaceutical sector value is $2.8 trillion US. So these are two sectors which mankind are made guinea pigs. They don't have any use for prisoners, prisons, governments, technology, money, you name it. Bottom line is, you are the food and they are hungry. Wherever they can extort, they will extort. The question is, if everybody is thinking alike, then somebody isn't thinking. If everybody is thinking alike, and somebody isn't thinking. How come we still continue our normal life so disorganized, so muddled up, jumbled, disarranged, struggling? We in our own lives, like we volunteering to be sent to the slaughterhouse. So preparing is important for the people, especially iman-wise, amal-wise, and asbab-wise as well. So somebody may say, but it's khilaf tawakkul. Understand tawakkul. Whoever's saying this, do you know tawakkul? Have you tasted tawakkul? Have you treaded the path of tawakkul? Have you studied Quran and Hadith? Story of Yusuf alayhi salam. وَقَالَ الْمَلِكُ إِنِّي أَرَى سَبْعَ بَقَرَاتٍ سِمَانٍ. The dream which the king needed interpretation, Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam gave the helm. And the commentators explain, وَيَدُلَّهُمْ عَلَى ضَرُورَةِ الْإِسْتِعَانَ بِالرَّخَاءِ عَلَى الشِّدَّةِ وَبِالْإِدِّخَارِ مِنْ أَيَّامِ الْغِنَى وَالسَّعَةِ لِأَيَّامِ الْفَقْرِ وَالضِّيقِ. When you have affluence, when you have wealth, when you have the opportunity, when it is peace, prepare for the time of constraints, for the time of difficulty. And that's what Yusuf alayhi salam encouraged. You will harvest, store it, be thrifty. على أن عدم الإسراف في الإنفاق. You know there's turmoil coming, so be vigilant. Don't be extravagant. So encouragement here was for 14 years So the 7 years you will do this, then the next 7 years you will do this year. So it was a 14-year plan of execution. So yes, Allah is Razaq, sustenance is from Allah. If you are saying that and you are the mutawakkilin, then today why did you go to work? Then you just wait for money to fall from the sky, throw some dollars in your backyard and pluck the fruits of the dollars. So a'iddu, prepare whatever is needed. So we should ask ourselves some golden questions. Each question is 10 points out of 100. For dunyawi line, number 1, do you have alternate energy options for 1 year? Yes or no? Do you have any skill to grow your own food? Number 3, do you have water resources for 1 year? Number 4, if there is a nuclear winter, which will mean that the entire atmosphere will be covered and the temperature on the earth will become freezing, there will be no food supplies available. Do you have enough food supplies for 1 year? Number 5, do you have any nuclear radiation protection mechanisms if there is a nuclear fallout? Number 6, during that radiation and fallout, do you have any safe water supply? Means those people who are taking normal precautions, if there's a nuclear fallout, your water will become contaminated. Number 7, do you have enough medical supplies, first aid skills in case? Number 8, have you secured your premises and prepared tactically to protect yourself? Number 9, do you have a full evacuation plan? So your residence, your home, if you need to evacuate, you've got 30 minutes, you are told move. Do you have an evacuation plan? Do you have a route plan? What conveyance, what vehicle, if vehicles cannot be driven, if there is no fuel, etc., etc. Number 10, in your community, are you geared up to handle this catastrophe? Then deen-wise, we've been taught the morning and evening adiyah. There are around 50, which is for all our needs. Are you particular about these du'as morning and evening daily? Number 2, are you familiar with the du'as and the amal to draw Allah's help? Number 3, are you a peg of the masjid? Part of the amal that will ward off a calamity is that those people ammari buyuti, when the houses of Allah are frequented. Number 4, is your salat so powerful enough that you can draw the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Maulana Yusuf rahmatullah alayhi used to say, जिसके नमाज में 2 रोटी मिलने का यकीन नहीं है तो उस नमाज से किस तरह जन्नत मिल सकती है? If through your 2 rakat salat you can even draw a piece of bread, a roti, how do you expect it to draw Jannah, to draw the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Number 5, what is your tongue constantly engaged in? The dhikr of Allah, tilawat of Quran, dawat or something else? Number 6, are you habitual of long rakats and long dua in the darkness of the night? Number 7, is your home abad, filled with amal or filled with evil? Number 8, do you have this desire to give your life for Allah, or your desire is more to save your life? Man mata wa lam yaghzu, and other hadith, أو كما قال من سأل الله شهادة بصدق. Do you have this desire to become a shaheed? Number 9, would you consider your deeds good enough to draw Allah's help, or your amal currently you are doing will draw the wrath and adhab of Allah? And number 10, have you prepared so much for akhirat that you're ready for death? You're ready to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we need to introspect and see what preparation are we making, zahiri and batini. Ask yourself the question, why has there been a budget in the US, the Biden administration, of over $1.2 trillion for nuclear weapons program. And why is this war with Russia, China currently part of the drawing board for the Pentagon? If we go back in history, we had many wars, from Korea to Vietnam to Cambodia to Iraq to Libya to Syria to Yemen, the list goes on. And now it's the post-war era. If you look at the PNAC, which is the project for the new American century, it's called America's Long War. Let's go into the PNAC document and what it is saying, and see how Ukraine fits in and the rest of the pieces of the puzzles fit. So what's their core mission? They want to defend the homeland, they want to fight major threats, they want to secure the environment, they want to make the US the revolutionary in military affairs, etc. But what's very important, and I will quote, maintain nuclear strategic superiority, number one. Number two, exploit the revolution in military affairs. Number three, increase in defense spending. So this whole agenda, the military agenda, and currently with the Biden administration, this is consistent with the PNAC guidelines. It's in sync. They are deliberately destroying sovereign countries and are the cause of millions of deaths. So who's the puppet? Who's the one pulling the strings, and who's the spectator, the one being made a fool? There was a man who went to the king's palace and he had spread the word previously he could make animals speak, so he became notorious. It was lies. He came to the palace, then he introduced himself as a man who can make animals speak. So he addressed the king, and the king said, "Can you make my horse speak like humans?" So the man said, "Not a problem." He thought for a while, pondered, he said, "I need to think about it," made like he's struggling, then said, "Yes, but it's a very difficult and expensive exercise." The king said, "No, I'll fund it." So he said, "No problem, done." So he was leaving the castle, somebody on the street met him and said, "It's impossible to teach a horse to speak like human beings. What do you have to say about it?" So he said, "You know what? The king will die one day, the horse may die, I may die. The king has given me money. I've got 10 years. Who cares? I need to enjoy." So who's the fool and who's the fooler? So at your expense, at your distress, at your destruction, at your death, they will thrive. But I need to blame myself. I am to blame because the love of dunya has become so entrenched, the love for amassing wealth. I've got stuck into the system. I'm not particular about my eating habits. If it's original, if it's organic, if it's not tainted, the different things that we eat, so much E numbers, so much preservatives, so much additives, the list goes on and on and on. So we are part of our own destruction. So this love of dunya has reached levels beyond comprehension. They say there was a youngster who was involved in a dreadful car accident. His BM was ripped away on one side along with his arm. So a policeman, a paramedics arrive on the scene. So the youngster was in a state of shock, saying, my car, because it's his BM, his Beamer. So the policeman seen his injuries, inspecting, and said, "You know what, sir, I think you need to be more concerned about your arm than your car." So the youngster looked down at his arm in horror. He was perplexed to see that his Rolex was gone. He started screaming, "My Rolex, my Rolex." So where the situation is and what's he worried about? We are the same. So understand it well, these wars are there to generate money. Let's go back in history. Persian Gulf War. This was one of the shortest conflicts in US history. $116 billion. 1991, 0.3% of the US GDP when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. That's around August 1990. So this was the US coalition with NATO allies and Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Operation Desert Storm, which lasted for 42 days and ended around February 1991. That was then, if we go back in time, World War I, we're just talking of a short one, then longer than that duration, 1 year, 7 months, $382 billion, 116,000 deaths. Going to Europe, 1914, USA neutral. Why? Because they were funding, they were loaning France, Great Britain. Then America decided to get into the war, so they declared war on Germany, April 2nd, 1917. And after 19 months, 116,000 troops and $382 billion down. Then moved down 1950, North Korean military and the Korean War. Consequences, $390 billion, 36,000 lives. Moved down, Vietnam War, cost $843 billion, duration 17 years 9 months, deaths 58,000 casualties. So America withdrew around 1973. Then the war in Afghanistan, $910 billion, the so-called US military deaths, 2,300, obviously speculative figures, so 17 years of war. Then Iraq War, $1 trillion, $1 trillion, and the so-called weapons of mass destruction in the invasion, 2003, when Saddam Hussein was overthrown. It was an invasion. 4,400 US military deaths. We won't even get to the casualties of Iraq civilians and innocent children. World War II, moving on to figures now, $4.69 trillion spending, duration 3 years 9 months, military deaths 406,000. That was 36% of the US GDP. So remember, it was Germany, Italy, Japan, US got involved 1941 after Pearl Harbor, and Hiroshima and Nagasaki 1945 August, the war ended. Remember, this data here is not including veterans, the benefits, the interest on loans to finance the war, the assistance to allies. But if we just look at the estimated amount of the Afghanistan and Iraq was around $2 trillion. And the estimated interest cost by 2050 is $6.5 trillion. So America needs war, and there's a history behind it. But before we get into the history, just to understand the figures and how much money is involved, we are talking of trillions of dollars. So let's visualize this. Take a stack of $1,000 notes, bills, and if you had to stack $1 million, would be 4 inches high. Stack $1 billion, that would be around 358 feet, which is the height of the Statue of Liberty. Take $1 trillion, that's 67 miles high, which will be in outer space. And that's further than the rocket which Elon Musk launched last, further than that. So why is America supporting this military agenda? So we'll have to go back to the wars and see between 1942 and 1945 what were the profits of the 2,000 biggest firms in the US, and their profits were 40% higher. These are declared figures, right? It's obviously secret agreements, secret trade, etc. But it would be much more than that, 100, 200, 300, maybe 400, 500%, Allahu A'lam. So such a profit boom was not possible without war. So the big business in America, corporate America. So 60 firms had 75% of all the lucrative military contracts. The big corporations, Ford, IBM, or we can call them the war hogs. So sales increase. Let's take it IBM from 46 million to 140 million dollars, and it increased and increased. So a lot of money to be made, and the rich, the all-powerful America had to build somebody, and these corporations, it was a money dynasty, because it was all these wealthy families, members of parliament, finding a way to make money on either side. So corporate America, now money was injected into the military sector. So in 1945, with regards to the Soviet Union, Washington never perceived them to be a threat. So Moscow was never a threat. But now they had raked in so much money that they had to find an alibi to monopolize this economy. And they needed a conflict with a superpower. So corporate America, the super rich, needed something to justify this humongous, this titanic expenditure. And they needed the profits to continue to go. So the American military now was just a money-making machine. And from there, we will see, go back into 1945, where the public debt was around $258 billion, but by 1990 to $3.2 trillion, 2002 $6.1 trillion, and April 28, 2022, the Congressional Budget Office had released a report, and they needed to stabilize a debt of $30 trillion. So that was on one side. Then secondly, they were paying 50% of the taxes when initially it started. Then from the Cold War, they found ways to justify avoiding taxes. Now they were paying only 1%. Why? Because the nation's big corporations, the multinationals, so they were making billions and trillions of dollars, and they were not paying taxes. And who was paying for it? The American workers, the middle class. So the public debt was ballooning, and the elite group was getting richer and richer and richer. So 13% of your middle class income, approximately 31 million people, were coming below the poverty line, and 1% of all Americans own 34% of the nation's income. So when the Cold War collapsed, then there was a need to justify. So they needed alibis, and that's why we see after 1990, from the slaughter in Iraq to the massacre of innocent people. So just that alone, $1.3 billion per day expenditure. Then they brought in Somalia, then they brought in Yugoslavia, war upon war, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Rice, for all the so-called peace-loving military hitmen. So they were the angels of doom, the angels of death, the Rambos of the world. So September 11 happened, and like that it spiraled out. So America, the wealthy, the so-called privileged, need these wars to survive. And now we are at that level where possibly, Allahu Alam bis Sawab, we may face a global world war. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq of preparing accordingly, doing the necessary amal, so that we draw Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's help. Wa akhiru da'wana anil hamdulillahi rabbil alamin.